As the battle raged around them during the first 3 days of July 1863, the citizens of Gettysburg realized that their once peaceful town was now a battlefield. For many, the safety of their family was their main concern. Some gathered their valued possessions and fled, while others sought the safety of their cellars. Amelia Harmon, who lived on the first day's battlefield, recalled, "From our cellar prison, we could hear the constant crack of rifles, the hurried orders, and outside the mingled roar of heavy musketry, galloping horses, yelling troops, and the occasional boom of a cannon. The suspense and agony of uncertainty were awful. We could hear the beating of our own hearts above all the wild confusion." On the first day of the battle, the Southern Army captured Gettysburg. Imagine thousands of Northern soldiers retreating through the town, pursued by thousands of Southerners, and all over the town, families were huddled in groups in their cellars. Sally Myers, who lived on High Street, recalled, "I will never forget the retreat. It was something terrible. No human words can describe it, and no one who was not on the scene can realize it. The order came at 4 o'clock for everyone to go to the cellar. We stayed in ours for 2 long hours, and I will never forget them. Some of the retreating men went through our house, and the noise above our heads, the rattle of musketry, the screeching of shells, and the unearthly yells added to the terror and cries of the women and children." Albertus McCrae lived on the corner of Baltimore and High Street. In his reminiscence, he wrote, "During the retreat, an officer rode his horse up on the pavement among the soldiers and said, 'All you good people, go down to your cellars or you will all be killed.' We obeyed him at once. Several neighbors and their families sought our house, for it was large and well built with a strong cellar and walls of stone. Hardly were we all down in the cellar when we heard heavy fighting all around the house. There were several small windows in the walls, and their light cast shadows on the opposite wall of men rushing back and forth. Those shadows filled us all with horror." Anna Garlack, who lived along Baltimore Street just a short distance from here, in an interview she stated, "The soldiers in the retreat called to us to go to the cellar, go to the cellar. Our cellar had a foot or more of water in it, and after we'd been told several times to go to the cellar, Mother took us up to the next house on the street. And when we went into the basement of the house, we were hardly there before the rebels appeared over Baltimore Hill." During the night of July 1st, the Garlicks returned to their home, and Anna described their efforts to make their own cellar suitable for occupation, not just for their family, but for several other nearby families who took refuge with them. During the early morning of the 2nd, Mother and Brother Will fixed up our cellar to live in. In the yard, among the lumber were blocks of wood. Mother and Will rolled them down into the cellar and stood them up and then put boards across the logs so as to be out of the water. There were 2 banks of ground in the cellar at either end, and these Mother fixed up by covering them with boards with a board path to various parts of the cellar. Then she put one family on one bank, another family on another bank, and a third on the platform of boards over the water. One can only imagine the uncomfortable situation that many of the families in the town found themselves in. For the residents of South Baltimore Street, it was worse. The Southern Army had overrun the town, and their skirmishers occupied the buildings around us. Union soldiers occupied Cemetery Hill, and the 2 forces fired back and forth at each other, forcing the citizens to remain in their cellars throughout the fighting. One of the most famous accounts of the action is from John Rupp, who lived here on South Baltimore Street, just a short distance from us. The Adams County Historical Society is in possession of a letter written by John to his sister-in-law on July 19, 1863. In it, he described his warm and uncomfortable situation. The rebels occupied the whole of town out as far as the back end of my house. Our men, the part of town which lies between our house and cemetery. Our men occupied my porch, and the rebels in the rear of the house, and I in the cellar. So you could see I was on neutral ground. John Weinbrenner purchased this residence in 1842, and at the time of the battle, he lived here with his wife and 3 daughters. Because of the heavy fighting west of the town, 2 students of the Lutheran Theological Seminary sought refuge in the house with the family. And we are fortunate that one of them, Martin Luther Culler, left us his account of the time in which he referred to this area as his cellar prison. Now, if you come here to what is now Mr. G's old-fashioned homemade ice cream, you can actually see the bullet holes in the house, the remnants of the sharpshooter action that took place here on the 2nd and 3rd day of the battle. Again, it's difficult for us today to imagine what it must have been like for the residents of Gettysburg to hide in these uncomfortable spaces for hours at a time. Of course, coming down into the Weinbrenner cellar, we get an idea of what it must have been like and how difficult this is not a cellar, it's more of a crawl space. According to Martin Luther Culler, we had to remain in the cellar as long as daylight lasted on Thursday and Friday. In our prison, we could hear the Union cheer and the rebel yell out on the bloody field. While the shells shrieked and moaned, flying over our heads, we could hear the roar of the terrific cannonading, which caused the house to shake. While ever and anon, many balls were crashing through the doors and windows above us. Soldiers of both sides were killed in the skirmishing at the edge of the town. And of course, one civilian, Mary Virginia Wade, was killed on the morning of July 3rd, 1863, by a bullet that came from one of the sharpshooters somewhere here near the edge of the town. From the evening of July 1st until the early morning hours of July 4th, the Southern Army occupied the southern edge of Gettysburg. Northern soldiers retreated back to Cemetery Hill on July 1st and occupied the ground out in front of us. And for 2.5 days, there was a violent sharpshooter action in this area. We're at the historic Farnsworth House. It was owned by Harvey Sweeney at the time of the battle. And this is one of the cellars around town that you can get access to. I should mention that much like the Weinbrenner cellar, this was a crawl space at the time, and the cellar has been actually dug out. But during the fighting, the families of Harvey Sweeney, a Weichert family, and the Slentz family that had fled their farm on the first day's battlefield were all huddled in this cellar. We don't have a specific account about what it was like to be in the cellar during the battle, but you can come down here and you can experience what the space must have been like for these people at the time.